Hello everybody, welcome to Paris today and welcome to another live episode of my series that brings you on the streets of Paris in real time. Episode number 61, we're in the heart of the Latin Quarter today. This is a special weekend today in 2019. This is the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Paris. Exciting times and what a great thing to commemorate. In fact, today, the 24th of August, as I stand here today, is literally the 75th anniversary to the day of the moment that the Allied troops first made their way into Paris to begin the end of the Nazi occupation. So we're going back to the year 1944 today, and we're going to walk through some extraordinary history. Specifically, I want to show you the locations here in the Latin Quarter of Paris, the location of some of the most famous barricades that the French resistance set up. Let's get underway here, episode number 61, Barricades of Resistance. We're here at one of the most animated and one of the busiest intersections in all of Paris, in the Latin Quarter. You're looking down here at the Boulevard Saint-Michel. The Fontaine Saint-Michel is just here at the end. And Boulevard Saint-Germain, always packed with locals, with traffic, with tourists, with pedestrians, scooters. As I look up here, or rather toward the south, we're looking at the Luxembourg Gardens. And then even here, you may recognize the Roman ruins of the Cluny. So that gives you an idea if you've come through Paris before. That's where we are. So let's take ourselves back to the beginning of this occupation. It was a long 4-year occupation during the Second World War. And before we get to the resistance, let's break down what happened, because in June of 1940, Hitler and his forces invade northern France. And before that, they arrived in northern France, but in June of 1940, this happened. I want to set the stage here. This is the Rue de Rivoli, with the Tuileries Gardens on the right-hand side and the Louvre in the distance. And so starting in June of 1940, Paris changed drastically. And I think this photo, for me, best exemplifies how Paris transformed. And there's another photo that I want to share with you too, before we get started with the barricades. And this is a chilling image. Some of you are familiar with it, right here. So that is extraordinary. Of course, that says it all really, at Trocadéro with Hitler and his cronies. So those two images I just showed you, for me, really represent how Paris was transformed. The start of a long and arduous 4-year occupation. Let's cross the street here while we can. Fast forward those 4 years, because I can't cover the whole occupation, of course. This is just a bit of an overview of where the barricades were set up of the resistance. When D-Day happened in June of 1944, June 6th, over 156,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. And they started to make their way toward Paris. Long story short, on the 19th of August, ahead of the arrival of the Allies, the French resistance here got the call from their leaders to rise up and start building barricades. Men, women, children, professors, students, all walks of life. They built over 600 barricades in Paris. Many of them primarily here in the Latin Quarter. There was a lot of activity, resistance activity here. So right here, this very intersection where we're starting, had several barricades, and it had a very ominous name. This was called, right here, again, the Boulevard Saint-Michel, Boulevard Saint-Germain. It was called the intersection of death, le carrefour de la mort. Why was it called that? Well, because an awful lot of German Nazis were killed here. And I want to show you the barricade right here. We're looking on the Boulevard Saint-Michel. And part of the fun today is we're going to compare these images. If you can make this out, I want to show you. That cafe across the street used to be called the Cluny, Café de Cluny. And if you can make that out, there's a lamppost here on the right-hand side and the awnings to the left. And that's what it looks like today. Le carrefour de la mort, the intersection of death. And plenty of Germans would have come through here facing this barricade, and the French resistance would have taken them out. Imagine up here, by the way, in all the windows you would have rifles of the resistance trained on this intersection. In the nearby universities like the Sorbonne and the Collège de France, you would have chemists, chemistry professors and physics professors who were in their laboratories at the university mixing Molotov cocktails for the French resistance and whatnot. So, one more look at this one. They were tearing up cobblestones and those metal grates around the bottom of trees. tree trunks, car tires. I've got another one to show you as well. Same intersection, same barricade, slightly different iteration. And it's remarkable. You all know, if you're a lover of history and a lover of Paris like myself, the layers of Paris. You can go back all the way to Roman times, through medieval, through the Renaissance, through, well, World War II. And so these streets is where a lot of this played out. Starting the 19th of August, 1944, the beginning of 6 days of infighting here between La Résistance and the occupying forces of the Germans. Before we leave this area, I've got to give a shout out to a bit of girl power. We don't know this lady's name, but she was stationed here, a member of the resistance, stationed right here at this barricade in at the intersection of death, as it was nicknamed. Remarkable. People from all walks of life. We don't know who she was. History lost track of her name, sadly. But on her hat, she has the initials PC5. And so that may have meant command post for the 5th arrondissement. That's about as much as we know of her. Now, the reason this was so strategic at the intersection of death is that down here, the Luxembourg Gardens had a headquarters for the Luftwaffe, and there was a lot of German activity down there. By the way, just disclaimer, I'm going to sort of interchange the word Nazi and German. You know, I think a lot of people get rubbed the wrong way sometimes because there were good Germans as well. But anyway, I'm just for a grammatical variation. Sometimes they're German, sometimes they're Nazis. I'm talking about the bad Germans, so I hope nobody gets their pants bunched up for that. Anyway, the Luxembourg Gardens here. Tanks were going to come up, German tanks, once the insurrection began of the resistance. The tanks were going to come here up Boulevard Saint-Michel, and that's why the barricade had to be placed there. So that's the first of many famous battlements that I want to show you. Thanks for all the bonjours and the well wishes, everybody. Thanks for everybody welcoming me back from my little hiatus, my family vacation. Again, a street of the Latin Quarter, some of you may know, there's a McDonald's here, which is funny. That McDonald's wasn't always there. In fact, I want to show you this street and I want to compare. There was another barricade here. I want you to note in particular that little sort of small house at the back of the street, at the end of the street, because I want to show you this. Same little house at the end of the street. And you know, all the architecture is essentially the same. Notice there was no McDonald's there at the time, though. No fast food joint, but this is Rue de la Harpe. Looks like the word harp, but Rue de la Harpe. And it made up part of this intersection of death, as I mentioned. Remarkable. What were the resistance up to? Well, historians tend to break it down into three major factions, or three major functions of what the resistance were doing here in August of 1944. They were sabotaging. They were, you would cut the brake lines or just, cut the tires of a Nazi vehicle in the middle of the night. They also were trying to help downed soldiers get back over from behind enemy lines, so give them escape routes and whatnot. But also there was a lot of transmission of messages and gathering of intelligence. And then the resistance were very genius in that, where they could bake hidden messages, notes into loaves of bread. They would roll up messages with intelligence written on them and put them into bicycle pumps or into, secret seams that were sewn into their jackets, pockets and whatnot. Women would hide messages under strollers and prams and, kind of right under the noses of the Germans, would manage to elude them and to transmit this very valuable intelligence. As we make our way to the next barricade, we're on the Boulevard Saint-Jacques. I want to pause here and just look at this cafe. This is one of many cafes, but I think it's particularly photogenic. I just had a nice little lemonade here. They have coffee, if you're a coffee snob like me. They have coffee from Coutume, which is one of the great roasters of Paris. And any place that serves Coutume coffee is always great in my book. So very hip and cute. But I want to mention, how was cafe culture affected? First of all, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, you wouldn't find any alcohol in any of these cafes. Of course, the rationing and they were just running out of all of this stuff. And that, of course, was a bummer, 3-4 days a week without alcohol in the bars and the cafes. But where it really hit home for the French, the cafe culture. There was a lack of coffee. They ran out of coffee throughout most of France and, through large parts of Europe. So they had to try alternatives here at these cafes, like acorns or toasted barley coffee, or sometimes they would even try chickpeas. But what really stuck was the chicory root. And chicory was literally nicknamed Le Café National, the national coffee. And it was not just defiance, but it was a symbol of resistance to sit out here. And despite the best efforts of the Germans, the Nazis, to take away that French heritage, damn it, those locals would sit out here on the sidewalk cafes and they would drink that bitter, nasty chicory coffee. I guess some of you like it out there, but for me it's not. it's not like the real thing. And it was a sign, sort of a symbol or a message to the occupying forces. You're not going to take this away from us. The cafe culture will continue. They would also, tobacco would transform into eucalyptus leaves, for example, because they ran out of proper tobacco. They would filter water through beets to sweeten it lightly, and sometimes you could get beet-flavored water or beet-sweetened water. Some people, the rationing got so bad towards the end that you would make a meal just out of a bowl of lard with sugar sprinkled on it. They say the rationing got so bad in 1944 towards the end that you could fit a day's ration in the palm of your hand. That's all the government could afford you. All that they could offer you is enough food to fit in the palm of your hand for an entire day. I came across an amazing story. I mean, when you get into this history of the occupation and the liberation, the stories are just incredible. One of my favorites or one of the most impactful, there was a woman here, a French woman, who had a young baby, and she was so worried that her baby wasn't getting any vitamins, no citrus fruit, no vitamin C. So her friends and relatives, when they were lucky enough to be able to go to a cafe or restaurant, after the meal they would order tea, and they would take the little lemon slice of the cup of tea and slip it into their pocket and smuggle it out of the restaurant and bring it back so the baby could have just a little bit of vitamin C via this slice of lemon. And there are stories like that all around. We've made our way to the Rue Saint-Jacques. I'm waiting for traffic to stop. So while traffic has stopped, I want you to notice this is Saint-Séverin, the famous Latin Quarter Gothic church. Saint-Séverin, the little rooftop coming out. And I want to show you this right here. You'll see the little bit of the rooftop of Saint-Séverin and the street, the Rue Saint-Jacques. Now, what's going on here is, I love this, the French resistance had a little bit of sense of humor during it all. And what you'll see there, and I'm going to get out of traffic's way here, is they put, knowing the Nazis were going to fire back at their barricades, they put photos of Hitler and other Nazi generals on the front of the barricade. So that's what's happening there. So right across this very spot on the Rue Saint-Jacques, looking toward the Seine essentially, and that's Saint-Séverin. James McPherson's asking, so they dug up the cobblestones for the barricades. Absolutely, anything they could get their hands on. Tree trunks, sewer grates, tires from cars, sometimes cars themselves, overturned Jeeps and whatnot. And so just one last look at this here. Over 600 barricades, if I didn't mention that already, throughout the city. It was an enormous procedure. I'd be remiss here as we walked by if I didn't point out this amazing Salvador Dali sundial. We've got a lot of sundials in the city. Entire books have been written on them, but this is the only one that I'm aware of done by Mr. Salvador Dali himself. Pretty extraordinary stuff. And it's from 1966, 68. Having trouble reading the date up there. But he actually did it for his friends, because here at this address there was a furniture store that was owned by Dali's friends, and so he decided to put this here for them. And it was actually a televised event when he came to inaugurate the sundial. He was up on a ladder, or sort of an elevated platform, and Dali inscribed his name and the date right there on television. Now, if we point this out, if we look at this more closely, it's a woman's face with eyes that are flaming. The flames represent the sun. And her hair is curling on her shoulders. But at the top, it's actually intentionally shaped to look like a scallop shell, or in French, a coquille Saint-Jacques, because this street, the Rue Saint-Jacques, was that famous pilgrimage route of Camino de Santiago, or Santiago de Compostela, as it's known also. And so pilgrims all the time, that symbol, the scallop shell of the pilgrimage down to Spain, ran along this route. And so that's why the head of Salvador Dali and the sundial is shaped accordingly. Got Saint-Séverin there. I've got another fantastic image to show you. This street did not have just that one barricade with the photos attached. It had several along this route. Again, for fear of the Nazi tanks coming up from the southern part of Paris and trying to quell the insurrection, quell the uprising of the resistance. They took over a building on the 19th of August that we can see in the distance here, the Préfecture, the police headquarters, right there. That's where we're going to finish our walk today. Ooh, it is a hot one today. Let me turn around and we're going to look at Saint-Séverin from this angle. And I fear that my photo is going to be completely backlit. So we're going to do our best here. I hope you can make that out. And if you can't, I will turn around so we can shine some more light on this image. But it just shows us that behind Saint-Séverin, here again on the Rue Saint-Jacques, there was yet another barricade that ran right across here. There's absolutely no evidence of these barricades anymore. You just kind of got to know. That's what we were looking at. Hopefully you can see it a bit better. And I want to show you the location of one last barricade. Just so you know, if you're new to this whole idea, my name's Frye. I'm a full-time tour guide and photographer and content creator, and I give tours in person. If you're coming through Paris in the near future or distant future, you can contact me, and if you take a tour of the Latin Quarter with me, it'll definitely include some of this great World War II history. I can show you bullet holes and plaques and other locations. Okay, so this is a very common street. We're close to Shakespeare and Company, close to Notre Dame. This is the entrance of the very touristy fast food portion of the Latin Quarter. Some people think it's kind of cool, some people hate it, but everybody goes there. So let me show you an aerial view of the same intersection with the barricade across. Can you make that out? This was a very famous barricade that had its own name and its own cast of characters. So we're going to get a little bit closer. It's the Rue de la Huchette. Some of you may have listened to jazz in the jazz club there, Caveau de la Huchette. Again, just an insanely busy and common thoroughfare. So the barricade was right here, running across the front of the street. And I've got another fantastic image. You know, one of the great photographers that documented this period was Robert Doisneau. And he did this image right where we're looking. Look at that. And there isn't a tourist that realizes it. There isn't even a local that realizes it as they walk by here in the center of the Latin Quarter. Fantastic Doisneau image. Now, the name of this, there's a big old plaque here. Very often the plaques will have flowers installed by the City Hall. So let's see, this is in honor of the defenders of the barricade that was known as Le Fortin de la Huchette. Fortin meaning like a small fortress, a fitting name, right? Le Fortin de la Huchette. These are the defenders that fell for the deliverance of Paris, for the liberation of Paris. 2 anonymous men, and then these others that are named, 28 years old, on the 19th and 25th of August. Now the 25th, which we'll be celebrating tomorrow, was the liberation itself. Now, what's really fantastic is look at this at the bottom. If you continue to read, it says, this is an homage requested or offered by the chief of the group, the leader of the group, and it was Madame Briand Béatrice. Madame Briand Béatrice. And she, luckily, we have a photo of her. One of my favorite photos of the resistance. If we imagine the barricade right here, and we get on the other side of it, looking out. Some of you might even recognize this image. Look at that. That is Madame Briand Béatrice. C'est bon. Or likely, I think the plaque reversed her name, so we can call her Béatrice Briand. So there she is, Madame Briand. She was a baker in the nearby neighborhood. Fantastic. So thank goodness that plaque is there, not only to honor the fallen resistance fighters that were here, but also the leader of the pack here. One more time. That's Notre Dame, by the way. Some of you may have seen this idea before online. 5 years ago, for the 70th anniversary, there was a gentleman who calls himself Gollum 13, and he did this great series of photographs where he's holding up images like this compared to modern day these locations, what they look like today. So if you want to check him out, Gollum13.fr is his website. I thought I'd give him a shout out because certainly what we're doing today is a bit of an homage to his project as well. How many resistance fighters were there in Paris? People ask me that sometimes. It's kind of hard to pin down, and it depends on what book you read. But generally between 20,000 and 40,000 in the Paris region. Compare that to the fact that because of the D-Day and the Normandy invasions, the Germans, of course, were scrambling and heading north and trying to retaliate and whatnot. So there were only a few thousand Nazis left in Paris at that time, and so the resistance had a fighting chance, so to speak. We're going to finish here at the water. We are, in fact, at the Seine. That is the Préfecture. That is the first building that started it all on the 19th of August for the French resistance. First building they took over. A lot of police force that had gone on strike and then decided to come back, a few thousand of them, and take over the building. Again, I have to gloss over a lot of the really good juicy details because this is just sort of a bite-sized version of this period. But that's the first building they took over. From the 19th of August, on the 24th, literally today, exactly 75 years ago, the 24th of August, something remarkable happens. The 2nd Armored Division of the Allied forces finally makes its way to the edge of Paris, to the border of Paris, to finish the job of the resistance and to liberate the city. His name was General Leclerc, famous French general now, who is considered to have led that charge to come in. And his division, the 2nd Armored Division of the Allied forces, was actually the French unit that was the most well-armed French unit. So he had 4,000 vehicles and 200 tanks, and it was an immense undertaking. Now on the 24th, about 8:45 p.m., the first faction of Leclerc's division pops through. They were also supported, by the way, by the 4th American Infantry Division. I want to give them a shout out because that American Infantry Division had stormed Utah Beach previously on D-Day. So imagine that, storming D-Day and then heading to Paris and helping to liberate. But Leclerc's faction comes in on the 24th of August. 8:45 p.m. they take over the Hôtel de Ville, which was a symbolic victory, but it wasn't quite the liberation of Paris yet. And they were called La Nueve. It was actually a Spanish contingent. Got to give them credit. So La Nueve comes in the 24th. But then these people here, the resistance, are still holding out for the cavalry to come. They're running out of hope. They're running out of ammunition. They're down to 7 machine guns and only a few dozen rifles. And then what Leclerc does, who's still outside Paris, ready to bust through, he sends a little Piper Cub airplane with 2 pilots. And it comes across, dodging all of the anti-artillery, the anti-airfare artillery of the Nazis. And that little Piper Cub plane flies over here, and the resistance see a message dropped from Leclerc's airplane. And the message says, "Hold on, we're on our way." And it gives me chills every time I think of that, because the next morning, 25th of August, 1944, which we will celebrate 75 years of tomorrow, he bursts through that afternoon, and the bells of this ring out for the first time in 4 years. Nobody had heard any church bells in Paris. So the bells of Notre Dame ring out to signal the arrival, the full arrival of the 2nd Armored Division and the 4th American Infantry Division. And other bells ring out, and other churches, and all of a sudden Paris erupts in a symphony of all of its church bells, and it was a signal to all of the locals, all the Parisians, the resistance, and the Nazis as well, that it was the beginning of the end of the occupation. And by that very afternoon, the Nazis will have surrendered, or they did surrender, in fact. And in fact, the leader for Hitler in Paris, his name was von Cotitz. Von Cotitz, the Nazi leader running the show here, signed the surrender papers right here about 3:30 p.m. on the 25th of August. So we are right smack dab in the middle of this history. It's amazing. And in fact, that story I just told about hold on, we're on our way, the message falling from the airplane, you can find a plaque in reference to that right about there on the edge of the prefecture along the River Seine. So you'll see that commemorated. So I think we're gonna end on that note, but I want to share a couple more images with you. Again, I could really only gloss over the glorious stories and the history and the facts of this period. Maybe we'll do another episode in the future that goes a little deeper into what happened. But when the city was finally liberated, there are a couple of images, or one image in particular that I want to share with you, and it's this. The emotion in this photograph and the expressions on those faces. We have an Allied soldier with some of the local Parisiens. And that says it all, really. The war was not over on that day for Europe, but the occupation was over for Paris. So on that note, I hope you enjoyed this little glimpse back 75 years ago. And so I think I'm all out of photos. Let me double check. Yep. So thanks everybody from Notre Dame. Listen, if you're a Patreon supporter, which I encourage you to do if you want to help support my project here, you can give a donation monthly and help this project to survive and thrive. There's a link to that in the description of this video, and you can go and check that out, and you'll get a lot of rewards and a lot of goodies and extra content, extra Paris content to get even deeper. And speaking of that, I'm going to do a Café Chat privately for my Patreon supporters. We're going to join one of our own members of our club, Elizabeth Diamond, who, interestingly, and in a very apropos way, her parents survived the Holocaust, survived the concentration camps, and managed to give birth to Elizabeth. And she spent the first 9 years of her life here in post-war Paris. So she's got a lot to talk about in relation to this. Otherwise, if you're not going to become a Patreon member, no sweat. There are plenty of ways to follow me, Instagram and my Facebook page and my blog and whatnot, and you'll find all of those links. So I want to thank you so much. I want to give a shout out and a reminder that we have a book club for our patrons, and it's run by the lovely Christina Consolet. And I wanted to plug that because she's doing a discussion online privately for patrons who have read their latest book. And so if you're interested in reading about Paris and actually discussing it online as a group with a book club, then that's another reason to become a patron member. So that's going to happen very soon, I think. Christina will give you that info on the sharing page, our private sharing page on Facebook, if you want info about this book club discussion and future ones as well. So we've been staring at Notre Dame long enough, and you've been listening to me babble on long enough. Thank you so much. And I'm going to head over to the Café Chat with my good friend Elizabeth. So from the Latin Quarter, folks, I want to thank you for joining me. Join me next week for another theme, another part of Paris, probably some more photos, and just some of that good, lovely Parisian magic. Take care, everybody. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.